With warding being an integral part of Conquest, and the fact that wards just seem so overpowered in theory, it's always amazed me that I don't see a lot of wards in Conquest. I mean, this mainly applies to casuals, but a common theme amongst the people I play with seems to be to not buy wards unless you're either playing support or you're full build, and yet everyone I talk to seems to know how important warding is and how little 50 gold really is. The problem isn't that people don't know how good warding is. Sometimes they'll think about buying wards, but just not know where to place them, so they decide it's better for a teammate to buy wards and do it for them. And then everyone thinking like this in turn creates a sort of bystander effect, where you only need 2 to 3 people buying wards to cover the map sufficiently, but because everyone thinks that someone else is going to do it, nobody ends up doing it. Besides, each player is limited to 2 wards at a time now, so 4 players leaving the job up to 1 player, also known as the support, just doesn't make any sense. Another reason I see a lot is people forget to buy them or just tunnel vision their items, with their thought process being something along of, that's 50 gold I could save for my tier 2 boots. And if you think like this, I probably won't be helping you in this video. I mean, this video might help refresh you on the concept of warding, and maybe help you remember in the long run, but if you feel like wards are a waste of money, I'm not going to sit here and try to explain why you're wrong. Rather, I'll try to help out the people trapped in the limbo between knows warding is important and doesn't know what to do with wards. Wards are useful and generally worthwhile as long as they're giving you some type of information. Whether that information tells you where someone is or where they're not doesn't really matter, as both circumstances help you and your team immensely. I've taken 3 copies of the Conquest map and given suggestions of where to ward, and before I get into it, I just want to be clear that wards can be used on really any choke point or intersection in the jungle, any buffs you want to invade or protect, or even in the middle of lanes for some cases. These are merely a few examples, and more of a base you can use if you really can't figure out what to do with your wards. Now, I've sorted the wards into 4 categories. Defensive wards, for when you're trying to have a more passive lane or playing from behind, are blue. These wards are the ones you'll want to make sure you have up if their jungler is getting anxious for a gank and keeps going MIA, and they're probably the best option if you aren't confident in the matchup or feel like you're going to get behind in lane. For a more offensive option, I added in red wards. These are for when you're trying to be aggressive either in lane or forcing big objectives. You'll be using these mostly when you're ahead or they have a lot of mobility and you need to figure out their position long before they get close. This especially applies to gods with global ults like Thor or Apollo. The last 2 I added really just to make sure I cover all the bases. Yellow wards for objective control, which are self-explanatory. Just making sure you have control over Gold Fury and the Fire Giant. These are going to be highly contested ward placements, and you should always have a few sentry wards on your team ready to fight for vision. Then green wards. These are situational and usually going to be aggressive. I'll be explaining each of these wards specifically, as they don't necessarily provide offense or defensive utility, but rather fill a specific use, and there are certain situations where they can be very useful, but they can also serve no purpose other than to waste a ward slot. So if you are unsure if you should invest in one of the green wards, the safest option is to not bother. These maps are also going to assume you're on the order side, but ward placements can be easily reversed if you find yourself on the chaos side. The maps really aren't that different. The 3 maps are mainly for the 3 basic stages of the game: early, middle, and late game. And as for the transitions in the stages of the game, it's really just down to when teams start grouping up, and actually has a lot to do with your team comp and the enemy team comp, but a basic rule of thumb I use is that early game is going to last until the first few towers are killed, mid game lasts from then until each player is around 1 item away from full build. So first up here we have the early game. I won't bother talking about pre-game wards, as lately the meta has shifted to reward sustain, where you want to stay in lane as long as possible before taking that first back. This means potions are invaluable at the time, and the only time you'll want to forego buying wards to save money is when you're restricted to that 1500 starting gold. After that first back though, you should be picking up 1 or even 2 wards. Sentry wards don't serve a lot of purpose unless you're planning on securing a few ganks for your jungler, so you can still take a few potions back to lane. Before any of your towers fall, warding is really simple. The only reason to place wards in the first 5 minutes are to detect possible ganks or invades. That means the red and blue don't mean a lot here, as all these wards are essentially for defensive purposes. It's probably best to focus the red ones, as the sooner you see someone coming to gank, the quicker you can react and the safer you are. But no matter where you are, if you're having a tough time predicting enemy movements, you definitely want to make sure that this little triangle of wards here is up. This prevents anyone from ganking your lane undetected unless they take a very obvious and aggressive path, which leaves them open to being collapsed on. The green ward is something you'll place if you're playing mid or jungler and you have either managed to get ahead really early, or you have a much better early game composition than them. This green ward will let you invade and press your advantage when they go to do their back camps, letting you choose whether or not you want to fight them or just steal some XP. There isn't much else to say about the early game. The wards here are really just quality of life wards, where they aren't really necessary, but they'll make laning a lot less stressful for you. Warding options really open up in the mid game. For the most part, you should be buying a couple wards every time you recall, while making sure that your team has a few sentry wards up for counter vision. Defensive wards can be placed in literally any choke point inside of your jungle, depending on where the action is happening. But the only ones I'm specifically going to recommend are the wards in the left and right lanes. These wards assume the towers are down in those lanes, and they are used to check for anyone split pushing. Even if you have someone with teleport online, you're going to need an extra warning against any split pushes, as a lot of gods can potentially 100 to 0 a tower in a single minion wave. The blue ward there by Fire Giant is just precautionary. There isn't much of a chance of people going for Fire Giant in the mid game unless they get a deicide, and if they do go for Fire Giant, it's fairly easy to tell. But if you feel you lack the intuition, you can easily just throw a ward down there. Offensive wards in the mid game only really have use for taking objectives by force. If you have a better composition for taking Gold Fury than the enemy, you should set up some of these wards to catch out for a potential fight or steal before it happens, and thus have a much better chance of securing Gold Fury. Now the green ones this time around are very situational and have to do mainly with your jungler and solo laner. If you have someone like Bakasera or Apollo taking one of these roles, you want to press the advantage by split pushing. Taking teleport, especially if you're the solo laner, gives you an opportunity to teleport in on one of these green wards and take out a tower before the enemy team even knows what happened. On the opposite end of this, you may want to actually ward those two spots on your own side if they have a threatening split push god. Now on to the Gold Fury ward. Your ADC and support are going to want to hold on to a sentry, as vision of the Gold Fury is going to be highly contested. But notice how I put the dot really deep into the Gold Fury pit. Obviously, if you were to put it somewhere like here, you'll get better view of people crossing down this jungle lane while still keeping an eye on Gold Fury, but putting the ward directly inside the Gold Fury makes it really difficult for the enemy to deny your vision. Let's say if one person walks off to counter ward, they'll have to take multiple hits from the Gold Fury just to be able to attack your ward, making them take more time to do so as well as taking a lot of damage. Now finally for the late game. In this split push heavy meta, you should always be making sure you have these 4 blue wards up at all times and have someone always ready to recall, because even in SPL games, teams will still lose to backdoors. Other than that, you have the objective wards here I mentioned, basically the same concept as Gold Fury. Know when the fight is coming, keep an eye on potential steals, etc, etc. The other red wards are just examples, but you will want some deep wards at this stage of the game, again, just to catch out potential split pushers and get a few picks that help you secure the win. And then we have green wards, which are just for split pushing, although at this stage of the game, a lot of gods are capable of 1v1ing phoenixes without minions, so these wards become even more prevalent. I talk about split pushing a lot, but right now, split pushing is really important. A single player can decide the fate of a game against teams that aren't paying attention or have poor communication. Whether they get a phoenix or get multiple enemies to stop just for them, it can completely throw a wrench into their plans. Just be cautious, as if they decide to force a fight, you'll be down a player and will want to disengage in most scenarios. Even letting them have Fire Giant in some cases can work to your favor, but you'll always want to make sure your team is on the same page for split pushers. Again, these are just suggestions, and I doubt I covered every possible situation, but this video should give you a nice baseline, and this is just meant to serve as an example if you just don't know what to ward. If I missed anything huge or messed up, don't be afraid to tell me in the comments below, and until next time, I'm Everything Goat, and I don't have an outro.